The Columbian Exchange by Emma Lohorn and Natalia Pons. The Columbian Exchange was trade between North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. Other names for the Columbian Exchange were the Transatlantic Trade System and the Great Circuit. What was traded? Crops, domesticated animals, cultures, religions, manufactured goods and diseases were traded along the transatlantic trade routes. Crops that were traded were bananas, wheat, barley, potatoes, coffee, sugarcane, corn, squash, beans and tobacco. Domesticated animals that were traded were chickens, pigs, horses, goats, and cows. Cultures from Europe, Africa, and the Americas were mixed to create new languages, clothing, etc. Manufactured goods that were traded were boats, rum, guns and more. Diseases that were traded included smallpox, syphilis, measles, diphtheria, influenza, malaria and yellow fever. What were the effects on the Americas? Diseases killed natives, dropping their populations staggeringly low. This is due to a lack of resistance. A labor shortage occurred due to the death of the natives, so the African slave trade was established. The introduction of African slaves to the Americas invented languages, food and genres of music. Various Old World weeds were introduced with the cultivation of native crops. These included dandelions, shepherd's spruce and more. Native plants were exposed to sunlight and domesticated animals as deforestation occurred. This allowed for the death of many New World plants and the growth of Old World plants. Domesticated animals, along with non-domesticated animals were introduced. This included the earthworm, which aerated the soil and accelerating growth. What were the effects on Africa? African kingdoms began to sell their people to the Europeans for guns, rum and other manufactured goods. Other tribes and kingdoms were raided with the use of the weapons they bought. Birth rate increased with the introduction of crops from the Americas and Asia. The practice of polygamy was introduced as mainly young males were taken and sold into slavery. Polygamy kept the birth rate rising. Women were able to have more opportunities in workforce. Because mostly men were taken and sold into slavery for hard labor, women took over many jobs that were usually male-dominated. What were the effects on Europe? Increased population growth a year due to the introduction of crops that improved nutrition for the average person. Europeans now had more food options that provided better nutrition to them, such as maize, various squashes and potatoes. Social classes became even more divided because of newfound wealth through a huge overseas trading system. The cultivation of farmland increased due to the introduction of new crops. There became increased use of rural areas for crops. And finally, the introduction of the new economic system of mercantilism. What labor systems emerged or continued? The encomienda system was a grant of native people to a powerful conquistador, soldier, official, etc. to have them work, mining, crops, etc. Indentured servitude was semi-coerced labor in which a person signs off around 7 years of their life to work for another person. This mostly involved sailing to a newly founded colony and was done by people who wanted to move to a new colony but could not afford it. It mostly used for inside labor, as coerced slaves were used for outside labor. Serfdom was a system where farmers were bound to a landlord. Landlords fought and sold their land, which included the farmers and their plot of land. The Meta system was an original Incan system in which an adult male must spend 1/7 of his life working for the Inca, then would return home. This system was adopted by the Spanish as well, mostly with silver mines. As natives died, the time another would spend working would increase. Eventually there were no natives left to work the dangerous job. What was the Middle Passage? The Middle Passage was the voyage of African slaves to the Americas. It also took goods such as knives, cotton cloth and brass dishes to the Americas. Millions of Africans made a 90-day journey to the Americas, where they would be auctioned off and sent to be slaves. These ships were disgustingly overcrowded, and many died while aboard. Around 1,600 Africans were fed on one ship, bound to a slab where they could only lay down. Starvation, disease, and abuse from captors was very common. Slaves were unable to stand or sit, so a majority died in this position. The journey has a disgustingly high mortality rate. The Africans that survived were sold as slaves with little chance of freedom.